Hello, I'm Naima. Welcome back to my channel. Firstly, I want to say thank you so much to all of the new people who have subscribed to this channel. A couple of weeks ago, I passed a milestone that I never expected to reach of getting 1,000 subscribers. The comments and support that I've received during this time have been a bright light in some of my darker days. So thank you so much. This video is a bit of an update on where I am now with my recovery and how my health is going. I'll be talking about a short overview of my recovery so far since being infected in March 2020. I'll then talk about how I am approaching my recovery differently now, and I'll finish by talking about where I am now. Those of you who've been following me for a while will know that my story is one of many ups and downs. I got COVID in March 2020, before mask mandates, before we had a lockdown in the UK, and long before the vaccines. I seemed to recover just fine after a few weeks, apart from a few residual symptoms, which I didn't take much notice of. I had a rash all over my back and arms that looked like discoloration, like my skin was discoloring. I had mild breathlessness every few days, but it would only last for a couple of seconds at a time, and the rest of the time I felt normal, and I had occasional sharp pains in my sternum. I didn't even necessarily link these symptoms to COVID because at that time, long COVID, we didn't know that it existed even. In October 2020, my long COVID symptoms well and truly kicked in. I had sharp chest pains that prevented me from sitting up. I was breathless after going up the stairs and experienced severe fatigue. At that time, it felt like my illness was cyclical in nature. I had periods where I could barely do anything apart from walk to the bathroom, and other periods where I would try and cram my former life into the space of a few days. I didn't know then that I was stuck in a boom and bust cycle. It took several months to get a diagnosis and even longer to learn to manage the symptoms. And every time a doctor would tell me I needed to manage my symptoms, I resisted because it felt like accepting that this would be long term and that I wouldn't just wake up one day and feel better. Things like pacing, so doing the same amount of activity every single day and finding my baseline, so working out how much activity I can do without worsening my symptoms, calming the nervous system, cutting back on activity, physical, mental, and emotional, and several medical tests, and of course, time. In June 2022, I got to a place where I could walk about 20 minutes per day and work 6 hours a day without worsening my symptoms. I was delighted with my recovery, and I could start to see that if things stayed on the same trajectory, I could live a normal life in a not so distant future. But I had a severe relapse after reinfection this summer, and I kept telling myself that it was just a crash or a flare, and that in a few days I would get my old baseline back. But I never bounced back and reached my previous baseline. For several months, every day I woke up feeling worse until my symptoms stabilized again towards the end of the year, and then in January I finally started to see some improvements again. There are a couple of things that I think have helped me to recover this time around. Firstly, energy management or pacing. I try my best to do the same amount of activity every day, regardless of if I'm feeling good or bad. I try to stick to the same amount. This amount should be the amount of activity that you can do without worsening your symptoms, but also the amount of activity that you can do on your worst days. And often I like to think whatever I think I can do, halve it, and that's usually clearer amount. I still struggle to keep to the same schedule sometimes, particularly on the good days when I get so excited that I want to do more than I can. But I have found that I'm now able to build up activity little by little. Secondly, calming the autonomic nervous system. I've spoken about this a lot before, and it has been a huge part of my recovery. Many of the symptoms I have mirror postural orthostatic tolerance, or POT, so my body is disproportionately in fight or flight. I spend about 2 hours a day doing what I can to offset this by doing things like meditation, yoga nidra, and breath work. I'll share some resources in the bar below of some things that you might like to try if you're new to this world. More recently, I've also been prioritizing sleep. I need about 9 hours of sleep a night, and I try my best to have a good sleep routine and improve my sleep hygiene. I do this by going to bed at a similar time every day and limiting screen time in the hours before bed. Improving gut health and diet has also been a huge part of my recovery. I take a probiotic, mushroom complex, psyllium husk all together to try to improve my digestion. I also eat sauerkraut every day, and other foods like kimchi and a natural probiotic are also really good. And I've also been doing an anti-inflammatory diet, so cutting back on things like gluten, sugar, dairy, and processed food. Limiting my exposure has also been a huge part of the way that I live now. I've been wearing N95 masks wherever I go, and I don't go anywhere indoors into crowded spaces as much as I can avoid it. I've also changed my approach to rest. I used to think of rest as watching TV, reading a book, listening to a podcast. That is not the type of rest that I need at the moment. These things were not energy intensive before I got ill, but now they are. So instead of only resting when I need to, I have planned rest throughout the day where I stop everything I'm doing, lie in a quiet room, and don't look at screens. I do this up to 3 times a day depending on how I'm feeling. Last but definitely not least, I've been taking LDN now for 6 weeks. I started taking low dose naltrexone 6 weeks ago with 0.5 milliliters, and I'm slowly building up to 4.5 milliliters. Even though I'm only just over half the dose, it already feels like I'm improving day to day. I have more energy. I seem to bounce back better from flares and crashes. I'll be doing a more in-depth video on this shortly as well. I'm finally at a stage where it feels like my symptoms are improving month to month. I still have to be quite restrictive about what I do and when, but I'm happy to be at a stage where I can be a bit more intuitive at knowing what I can and can't do based on what has helped and worsened my symptoms in the past. I still spend a lot of time reminding myself not to be hard on myself and that recovery is not a straight line nor something I can completely control. I'm feeling a lot more hopeful in general that I am on a path, but I also know how unpredictable and challenging recovery is, and that sadly flares, crashes, and difficult days are still a big part of the recovery process. Obviously, I still have bad days and my life is still very limited, but just noticing the subtle changes of health slowly returning has done a lot to improve my mindset and how I'm feeling more generally. I'd love to hear from you about what is helping you with your recovery. Behind the scenes, I've been moving house, and that's why I've been a bit slow to reply to comments and to get out some new content, but I have moved now. I'm in London where I've grown up most of my life, and I think I'll be able to get onto a much more regular schedule of putting out videos whenever I can. I'll see you in my next video. Thank you.